Sam Wilder has always believed that his farm was more than just acres of tilled soil. It was his legacy. A lifelong organic farmer and passionate steward of nature, Sam inherited Wilder Fields from his forefathers. Nestled on the fringe of a rapidly urbanizing area, his property is a living tapestry of golden wheat swaying in the breeze, vibrant vegetable gardens, and orchards bursting with seasonal fruit. At the heart of the farm stands a modest farmhouse and a scattering of barns that have witnessed generations of hard work, community celebrations, and quiet, introspective moments under an endless sky. For Sam, every furrow in the field and every row of crops tells a story. His deep connection to the land is not only a tribute to his family's tradition, but also a testament to his belief in sustainable living. From using organic fertilizers to embracing modern irrigation systems that harness renewable energy, Sam has managed to blend age-old practices with innovative techniques. His prize crops feed the local community, and his fields have become a sort of living classroom for young farmers and curious neighbors alike. However, life on the farm has recently been disrupted by an unwelcome intruder in the form of Kerren, the self-appointed president of a local homeowners association, HOA. With a reputation for rigid adherence to rules and a penchant for micromanaging everything from mailbox placements to the color of lawn ornaments, Kerren has long ruled the suburban enclave bordering Wilder Fields with an iron fist. To her, individuality is a threat to the pristine uniformity of the neighborhood, and every deviation from her strict aesthetic must be corrected immediately. The conflict came to a head one crisp autumn morning, when Sam ventured into his fields for his routine inspection. As he walked among the rows of carefully nurtured crops, he noticed a group of sharply dressed individuals striding purposefully between the furrows. At first, he assumed they were local inspectors, but as he approached, he realized with a sinking feeling that the group was led by none other than Kerren herself, clipboard in hand, scrutinizing every plant as if they were on display in a manicured garden. "Sam," Kerren said curtly, stopping in front of a row of heirloom tomatoes, "these crops are not in compliance with our community's aesthetic standards. They're too wild, too unregulated. You must trim and tidy them immediately to meet the HOA guidelines." Taken aback by her intrusion on what he considered his personal domain, Sam's initial shock gave way to indignation. "Kerren, these fields have been tended with care for generations," he replied. "I grow these crops organically. They are meant to be free and natural. Your so-called guidelines don't apply to a working farm." Her eyes narrowed, and her tone became icy. "Rules apply to everyone, Sam. If you refuse to maintain your property according to the community's standards, you'll face fines and perhaps more drastic measures." With that, she turned and strode away, leaving behind a trail of disapproval and a challenge that Sam knew he couldn't ignore. That confrontation marked the beginning of a battle that would test not only Sam's resolve, but also the spirit of the entire community. As the sun began to climb higher over Wilder Fields, Sam stood amid his ripening crops, anger mingling with determination. He knew that Kerren's overreach wasn't just about aesthetics. It was an attack on his right to manage his land as he saw fit. That night, as he sat on the weathered porch of his farmhouse, listening to the crickets and the rustle of the corn, Sam vowed that he would not allow bureaucratic tyranny to trample the legacy of Wilder Fields. The stage was set for a showdown, a clash between an independent farmer and an overzealous enforcer of conformity. The very next morning, Sam found another unwelcome surprise. Taped to his farmhouse door was an official notice, embossed with the HOA's crest and signed by Kerren herself. The letter charged him with violating community aesthetics by allowing his crops to grow naturally, deeming the wild, organic look of his fields as an unacceptable deviation from the neighborhood's manicured standards. It demanded that he immediately tame his fields, or else face a fine of $750. Every line of the notice exuded bureaucratic severity, as if his land were not his own, but a piece of public property to be regulated. Sam's pulse quickened as he read the notice. He knew the rules inside and out, rules that had never before been enforced on his property. With a deep sense of injustice, he sat down at his kitchen table, surrounded by law books and printouts of local zoning ordinances. Every document supported his right to farm naturally, without being forced into a sterilized mold. Confident in his legal standing, Sam promptly drafted a formal complaint challenging the fine and citing his property rights. That same morning, as the first hints of sunlight touched the dew-drenched fields, a sedan pulled up along the gravel driveway. Two uniformed inspectors emerged, clipboards in hand, their expressions unreadable as they approached the farmhouse. "Mr. Wilder," one said in a flat tone, "we're here on behalf of the HOA to verify that your property conforms to our community standards." Sam stepped outside, meeting their gaze squarely. "My fields are my livelihood," he replied firmly. "I grow these crops organically, and everything here complies with local law. I have every right to let nature take its course." Despite his calm explanation and the copies of zoning regulations he handed over, the inspectors scribbled notes, clearly under orders to find fault. Not long after, Kerren herself arrived. Dressed in her trademark crisp suit and exuding a sense of self-importance, she scanned the property with a disdainful gaze. "Sam, these fields are an eyesore," she declared, gesturing dismissively at the wild rows of crops. "You must immediately take steps to conform to the community's standards, or you'll face further penalties. Remember, the rules apply to everyone." Her tone was uncompromising, leaving no room for discussion. With that, she turned and walked away, leaving Sam fuming and more determined than ever. That evening, as Sam sat on his porch beneath a star-studded sky, he reviewed his legal research and prepared to take further action. The fine was not just a monetary threat. It was a symbolic assertion of Kerren's desire to control every aspect of his life. And Sam knew that if he did not stand up for his rights now, his way of life and the legacy of Wilder Fields would be forever compromised. In the days that followed, Kerren's tactics grew increasingly aggressive. What started with official fines and cold inspections soon escalated into a full-blown campaign to subdue Sam's independent spirit. Notices began appearing everywhere on his property, on the barn, along the fence, even stenciled onto the gate. Each notice accused him of minor infractions. His crops were too unkempt, his field layout non-compliant with community design, and his natural farming methods aesthetic hazards. The language was legalistic, but the intent was clear. Kerren was determined to force Sam into submission by any means necessary. Rumors began to circulate among the neighbors, whispers of how Kerren bullied homeowners who dared to deviate from her strict vision of order. One fellow resident confided that she had received an identical notice for her rose bushes growing wildly out of line, even though she had always prided herself on natural gardening. Another board member, growing tired of the arbitrary penalties, secretly informed Sam that many of the fines were not based on actual violations, but were simply a means for Kerren to fill the HOA coffers and intimidate those who resisted her. Determined to uncover the truth, Sam began to document every incident. He set up discreet cameras along the perimeter of his fields and around the farmhouse, capturing footage of inspectors arriving unannounced, measuring his crop rows, and issuing notices that seemed more like personal vendettas than genuine concerns. He also recorded snippets of conversations among HOA officials that hinted at misdirected funds and secret agendas aimed at crushing any form of natural expression on the land. With each piece of evidence, Sam's conviction grew stronger. He compiled a comprehensive dossier detailing every encounter, every notice, every intrusive inspection. The files contained photographs of the notices, video clips of inspectors' visits, and even screenshots of anonymous tips from other residents who had been similarly harassed. It was a damning portrait of an HOA that had lost its way, turning from a body meant to safeguard the community into an instrument of personal tyranny. When the next HOA board meeting was scheduled, anticipation buzzed through the neighborhood. Homeowners who had suffered under Kerren's draconian rules began to rally around Sam's cause. The meeting hall was packed with residents clutching printed copies of his evidence. As Sam stepped up to the podium, he spoke in a clear, measured tone, recounting the series of events, from the first fine to the increasingly invasive inspections, and presenting the evidence in a methodical manner. Every slide, every image underscored the fact that Kerren's actions were not isolated incidents, but part of a systematic abuse of power. The room fell silent as Sam's presentation unfolded. Even some board members, once staunch supporters of Kerren's strict regime, began to exchange uneasy glances. It was evident that the battle was no longer just about wild crops. It had become a fight for the fundamental right to live and farm freely, without arbitrary interference. By the end of the meeting, the seeds of resistance had been firmly planted. Homeowners left the hall with a renewed determination to stand against the oppressive measures. For Sam, it was clear that if Kerren continued to use the HOA as a tool for her personal vendetta, he would have to take even more drastic action. The community's support was growing, and the stage was set for a showdown that would test the limits of both bureaucratic control and individual freedom. One early morning, as the first light broke over Wilder Fields, Sam awoke to a scene that sent his heart racing. A group of individuals, led by none other than Kerren, had been inspecting his crops. Dressed in her signature power suit and armed with a clipboard, Kerren had trotted through the fields as if on a mission to find every imperfection in nature itself. She strode along the rows of vegetables and fruit, occasionally stopping to jot down notes or point out a discrepancy to a subordinate. To the untrained eye, it might have looked like a routine inspection, but Sam knew that this was yet another act of intimidation designed to force him into compliance. Fed up with the intrusion into his livelihood, Sam hatched a plan that was as unconventional as it was ingenious. He recalled the newly installed automated sprinkler system he had put in place just weeks earlier, a system designed not only to water his crops, but also to conserve precious water during the dry season. With a few adjustments and a remote control in hand, Sam realized he could turn that system into a tool of resistance. As Kerren and her entourage continued their inspection, Sam waited in the farmhouse, watching through his security cameras. At the precise moment when Kerren was leading a small group past a particularly lush patch of tomato plants, Sam activated the sprinklers. In an instant, a barrage of water jets exploded across the field, drenching Kerren, her subordinates, and any unsuspecting bystanders in a torrent of water. The effect was instantaneous and dramatic. The sprinklers, programmed to release a full blast on command, transformed the orderly rows of crops into a scene of wet chaos. Kerren's carefully maintained composure shattered as she found herself soaked from head to toe, her clipboard clutched uselessly in one hand. The meticulously groomed inspectors were similarly caught off guard, their notes dissolving in the downpour. The onlookers, who had gathered at a safe distance, erupted in laughter and cheers. Phones were raised to record the spectacle. Kerren, the self-proclaimed enforcer of community standards, was now the subject of a viral moment. Sam's well-timed activation of the sprinklers was not just an act of defiance. It was a clear message that he would not be bullied into conformity. In the midst of the watery chaos, Kerren attempted to regain control, shouting orders and trying to usher her group to safety. But the damage was done. The image of a drenched, sputtering Kerren, with water streaming down her face and her carefully styled hair ruined, became the emblem of her overreach. The inspectors, now laughing and scrambling to collect their soaked notes, had lost any semblance of authority. For Sam, the sprinkler attack was a turning point. It was a public demonstration that his property and his way of life could not be tamed by arbitrary rules or invasive inspections. The act resonated deeply with other residents, many of whom had long felt oppressed by Kerren's heavy-handed tactics. That day, as the water slowly subsided and order began to return to the fields, the community's mood had shifted palpably. Sam's ingenuity had sparked a ripple of defiance that promised to challenge the very foundation of the HOA's control. Cornered by a growing wave of public dissent and facing mounting evidence of her own overreach, Kerren resolved to launch one final, desperate power move. That evening, with the memory of the sprinkler debacle fresh in everyone's mind, she decided to take matters into her own hands. Determined to reassert her authority and silence the voices of rebellion, Kerren picked up the phone and called the local police, claiming that Sam's so-called unauthorized inspection of his crops had escalated into a public disturbance. Her complaint was as absurd as it was desperate, a last-ditch attempt to leverage law enforcement to put an end to Sam's bold defiance. Within minutes, a police patrol arrived at Wilder Fields. The officers tasked with investigating the alleged disturbance made their way to the fields, their expressions a mix of skepticism and routine professionalism. Sam, calmly tending to his property as he often did, greeted the officers with the respectful confidence of a man who knew his rights. "Good evening, officers," Sam said. "I'm happy to address any concerns you have about my property. Everything here is perfectly legal." Sam produced copies of his permits, zoning documents, and even a record of previous correspondence with the HOA, all of which demonstrated that his farming practices were fully compliant with the law. Meanwhile, Kerren's voice could be heard over the radio, insisting that the disturbance was serious and that the police needed to act swiftly to restore order. However, as the officers examined the scene and reviewed Sam's documentation, it became abundantly clear that there was no public disturbance, only a creative act of defiance. One officer even remarked on the efficiency of Sam's sprinkler system, which had been triggered in a timely fashion. Unwilling to accept defeat, Kerren wasn't ready to give up her war on Sam. In a final attempt to undermine his credibility, she covertly hired a private investigator to gather evidence of supposed mismanagement on his part. Late that night, while the community slept, the PI was caught on Sam's hidden cameras sneaking onto the property. The footage, time-stamped and irrefutable, showed the investigator fumbling through the corn rows and triggering sensors on the automated system, an act that clearly violated Sam's privacy and property rights. At the next HOA meeting, with the entire community in attendance, Sam took the stage. Calmly, he played the incriminating footage on a large screen. "This," he said firmly, "is proof that Kerren's desperation has led her to break the law in a bid to maintain her power. Instead of protecting our community, she's been invading our privacy and misusing her authority." The room fell silent as gasps and murmurs of approval rippled through the crowd. Kerren attempted to protest, claiming the footage was misinterpreted and that her actions were meant to safeguard community standards. But the evidence was overwhelming. The police had dismissed her complaint, and the video left no doubt that she had trespassed onto private property by hiring the PI. In a swift, dramatic reversal, the officers later issued Kerren a trespassing citation, a final, symbolic blow that further eroded her credibility. That night, as the echoes of the meeting faded, it was clear to everyone present that Kerren's final, desperate move had backfired catastrophically. The community's support for Sam and for the values of autonomy and creativity had never been stronger. In that decisive moment, it was evident that her days as the HOA's tyrant were numbered. In the aftermath of Kerren's public debacle and her last desperate power play, the community's long-held frustration erupted into organized rebellion. A hastily convened emergency town hall meeting was held in a Stark community center, its fluorescent lights and bare walls now serving as the backdrop for the final confrontation against tyranny. The room was packed with residents, many of whom had quietly suffered under Kerren's arbitrary fines and invasive inspections, armed with copies of Sam's dossier, photographs, video recordings, and written testimonies documenting every instance of harassment. One by one, homeowners took the floor, recounting their personal experiences of being bullied by Kerren and subjected to fines for the most trivial of infractions. The collective anger in the room was palpable. It was clear that this was not merely a dispute over farming methods, but a struggle for the very right to live freely without bureaucratic oppression. After hours of impassioned debate, the moment of reckoning arrived. In a historic, unanimous vote, the community resolved to dissolve the current HOA board and remove Kerren from her position as president. The decision was swift and decisive, a resounding rejection of the arbitrary control that had long stifled the neighborhood's individuality. The news quickly spread, and local media heralded it as the fall of the HOA tyrant. City officials, spurred by the overwhelming evidence and public outcry, launched an independent investigation into the board's financial practices. It soon emerged that funds had been misappropriated to support Kerren's personal vendettas, and many fines had been levied solely to intimidate nonconformists. The legal repercussions were swift. Heavy fines were imposed on several board members, and some faced criminal charges for fraud and mismanagement. For Sam, the collapse of the HOA was both a personal vindication and a communal triumph. Sitting on his porch one crisp morning, he watched as the new day broke over wilder fields, the electrified sprinkler system humming quietly in the background, a symbol of defiant innovation. His victory was not just his own. It belonged to every homeowner who had risen up against arbitrary authority. Across the neighborhood, the oppressive shadow of the old HOA receded, replaced by an atmosphere of renewed hope and self-determination. Neighbors began to openly discuss plans for rebuilding community governance on transparent, democratic principles. The era of Kerren's heavy-handed rule was over, and in its place emerged a spirit of collaboration and unity. For Kerren, the collapse was devastating. Once seen as the unquestioned enforcer of community standards, she now faced public humiliation on an unprecedented scale. Her home was soon listed for sale amid rumors of financial ruin, and whispers of her personal and professional downfall spread quickly. The community's rejection of her tyranny had sealed her fate. In the wake of the community's decisive vote and the dissolution of the HOA board, the legal system moved swiftly to bring accountability to the chaos that had reigned. City inspectors and independent auditors began a thorough review of the board's financial records, uncovering a labyrinth of misappropriated funds and baseless fines designed solely to intimidate homeowners. Armed with this damning evidence, a coalition of aggrieved residents, led by Sam, filed a class action lawsuit against the former board. Public hearings were held, during which Sam presented his comprehensive dossier: video footage of intrusive inspections, photographs of the ridiculous violation notices, and even evidence of internal communications that revealed Kerren's misuse of HOA funds. The courtroom became a stage for the community's collective voice, with every piece of evidence reinforcing that the board's actions were a flagrant abuse of power. The judge's verdict was swift and unambiguous. The board was fined heavily. Several individuals faced criminal charges for fraud, and the misappropriated funds were ordered to be redirected toward community development projects. The settlement also mandated the establishment of a new, democratically elected board, ensuring that future governance would be transparent and accountable. Local media seized on the story, hailing it as a landmark victory for grassroots resistance over bureaucratic tyranny. Headlines proclaimed the fall of the HOA tyrants, and the case quickly became a beacon of hope for communities across the region facing similar struggles. For Sam and his neighbors, the legal triumph was not only a financial victory, it was the restoration of their right to live free of arbitrary control. With the legal verdict and public humiliation now fully in place, Kerren's personal world began to unravel. Once the undisputed enforcer of the HOA's draconian rules, she was now exposed as a figure of arrogance and abuse. Forced to resign from her position, Kerren found herself isolated as former allies distanced themselves, unwilling to be associated with her tarnished legacy. Her home, a once proud symbol of suburban status, was soon put on the market amid rumors of financial instability. Personal relationships, too, began to crumble. Whispers spread that her longtime partner had abandoned her, unable to endure the relentless pressure and public disgrace. Attempts to secure even a low-level position in property management were met with derision and pity, and at local job fairs, potential employers exchanged skeptical glances when her resume was mentioned. One particularly humiliating moment occurred at a city hall meeting, where Kerren, desperate to salvage some semblance of authority, tried to justify her actions as necessary measures for maintaining community order. Instead, her feeble explanations were met with laughter and pointed remarks from residents, cementing her status as a cautionary tale of abuse of power. For Sam and the rest of the community, Kerren's downfall was a quiet, powerful vindication. There was no need for overt celebration. Every public misstep, every financial setback, and every whispered comment reinforced that no one is above accountability. Kerren's personal ruin became a lasting symbol of poetic justice, a reminder that tyranny inevitably crumbles when confronted by the united spirit of a community determined to live free. As autumn settled over Wilder Fields, the community found itself basking in a newfound era of freedom and unity. The dark days of arbitrary fines, invasive inspections, and overbearing control were behind them, a cautionary chapter now relegated to local lore. Sam sat on his porch, the soft glow of the sunset reflecting off his newly upgraded, electrified sprinkler system, a symbol of his ingenuity and defiance. At a celebratory block party held in the community park, neighbors gathered to toast their hard-won victory. The mood was light and buoyant as stories of past misdeeds were shared and laughter echoed across the fields. In one particularly memorable moment, a longtime friend produced a comically oversized HOA violation notice, accusing Sam of excessive sprinkler insurrections and unauthorized crop hydration. With a wry smile and a shake of his head, Sam accepted the faux citation and quipped, "I guess they really did try." The remark sparked a chorus of laughter and applause, a final mic drop on an era of tyranny. As twilight deepened and the party wound down, families and friends lingered together, sharing plans for a future defined by transparency, community-led governance, and respect for individual rights. The oppressive rules that once loomed large had been replaced by a system that celebrated innovation, sustainability, and the power of grassroots action. Sitting quietly on his porch as the last light faded, Sam reflected on the journey. Wilder Fields stood as a beacon of hope and resilience, a living reminder that no matter how high the walls of oppression are built, the united spirit of a community will always break through. The legacy of HOA Kerren's reign had been consigned to a cautionary tale, and with every passing day, the community embraced its freedom with renewed vigor. Fade to black.